Okay, let's dive in. Imagine this. You're standing on a mountainside, there's a cave entrance, and you know that inside. Well, inside lies this incredible record. Tens of thousands of years of life, animal and human, just preserved in amazing detail.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going today, a deep dive into Wezmeh Cave.
Wezmeh Cave, yeah. It's tucked away in the central Zagros Mountains, western Iran, not too far from Kermanshah.
And we're doing this dive because of some really remarkable source material that's come out recently, especially the findings from a big re-excavation in 2019.
Right, and the research paper that followed, it's given us so much new information.
So our mission here is really to unpack what makes Wezmeh Cave so special.
Exactly. It gives this unparalleled glimpse into animal biodiversity and deep human history, all from this one spot.
And as we get into the research, you'll see there are some real surprises. We need to explore, what makes this collection so different from others in the area.
The sheer variety of creatures is one thing.
Yeah, an astonishing array, and evidence of humans stretching way back. Plus, how the bones themselves tell this really complex story. Life, death, ancient times.
That's a lot layered together.
Definitely. So let's start with the place itself. Picture Wezmeh Cave. You said Zagros Mountains. It's a karstic cave. Limestone.
That's right, formed in limestone. And it's pretty high up, 1,430 meters elevation. Sits about 60 meters above the current valley floor.
Wow, 1,430 meters. That's quite high. Does that altitude or being high above the valley sort of influence what used the cave or how things got preserved?
That's a really good question. Its position likely made it, accessible, but also protected. The entrance itself isn't huge, maybe 2 meters wide, 1.5 high, facing north.
Okay.
You go into a main corridor, it's about 15 meters long, roughly. Varies a bit.
And then the research mentioned it takes a sharp turn, like 90 degrees west.
Exactly, for about 4 meters, and then it opens into this shaft.
A shaft. How
Yeah.
big?
About 4.6 meters long, but up to 7 meters high inside. And because that entrance is fairly small, only the very front part of the main corridor gets any daylight.
Ah, so deeper in.
Deeper in, that last stretch and the shaft, it's completely dark. And that darkness, combined with the cave structure, well, it really seems to have affected how things built up and stayed preserved over time.
Interesting. Now, the research mentions this cave wasn't just discovered. It has a history of investigation going back to 1999. But it wasn't straightforward, was it? There were issues, disturbances.
Unfortunately, yes, very much so. Initial surveys in '99, then the first proper excavation in 2001, they found significant stuff. But the site had been hit really hard by illicit digging back in the 1990s.
Oh, no, looters.
Seems like it. And that digging just mixed up so many of the layers, made understanding the sequence, the timeline, really difficult.
That must be so frustrating for the archaeologists. But even with that mess, the early work still managed to find some important things.
Absolutely. Despite the mixing, that 2001 dig found bones, pottery, stone tools from different periods. And crucially, it turned up key human finds.
You're right, the famous ones?
Yes, a Neanderthal child's tooth. And then later human remains, identified as early Neolithic herder farmers.
Wow. Quite a span of time right there.
And the animal bones, even then, hinted that large carnivores had used the cave, maybe intermittently, for tens of thousands of years, potentially back 70,000 years.
They even found fossilized hyena droppings, right? Coprolites. What can you even learn from fossilized dung?
Huh. Actually, quite a bit. Those coprolites were surprisingly useful. They contained pollen.
Pollen? Really?
Yes, direct evidence of the plants growing nearby during the Ice Age when those hyenas were using the cave gives you a little snapshot of the ancient environment.
Okay, that makes sense. So given all that disturbance from the illicit digging, why go back for a much bigger dig in 2019? What was the main goal?
Well, the main hope was to find some potentially undisturbed deposits, maybe deeper inside. But just as importantly, they made this huge effort to systematically sieve everything, all the sediment.
Everything, including the disturbed stuff.
Yes, including the material that had been churned up by the digging, both inside the cave and outside the entrance. It was painstaking work, I imagine, but absolutely necessary.
And based on the numbers in the source material, that meticulous approach really paid off. Big time.
It really did. The 2019 excavation yielded a massive amount of material, over 11,000 specimens recovered.
11,000. From one cave. That sounds like an incredible number. What makes that sheer quantity and their preservation so significant for research?
Well, the volume itself is impressive, yes. But combined with the fact that they're relatively well preserved, it makes this collection pretty unique. The research calls it unparalleled on the Iranian Plateau.
Unparalleled.
And one of the richest fossil collections in all of Western Asia, actually. It gives you a scale of data that lets you do much deeper analysis. You start seeing patterns you just wouldn't spot in smaller collections.
Okay, so let's get into those patterns. The animals. One thing that leaps out from the research is the huge proportion of carnivores. That's not typical, is it?
No, it's very unusual, and it's really one of the defining features of Wezmeh. Most Paleolithic sites around the Zagros, they're dominated by human activities. You find lots of herbivore bones, the animals people hunted.
Right, they're dinner leftovers, basically.
Exactly. But Wezmeh has this exceptionally high percentage of carnivore remains.
So instead of just a human campsite, Wezmeh gives us this unique look into what the predators themselves were doing. What kinds of carnivores are we talking about?
Precisely. It suggests the cave was a significant place for predators. We're seeing spotted hyenas, brown bears, big cats like lion and leopard.
Lion and leopard in the Zagros.
Yep. And smaller ones too, lynx, or maybe caracal, wildcat. Plus wolves, red foxes, and various mustelids, badgers, weasels, martens. They even found mongoose remains.
Mongoose. Wow. And the research specifically mentions finding 8 weasel skulls in 2019, calling that rare. Why is finding, a bunch of small skulls like that important?
Well, small carnivores often get missed, or they're just not preserved as well. Finding a good number of weasel skulls like that gives researchers a much better chance to study them properly, understand their role, how long they were around. It really highlights how careful that 2019 recovery work was.
Okay, but it wasn't all carnivores preying on each other. The sources talk about herbivores too, right? A good number of them.
Oh, absolutely, yes. The herbivore list is extensive, and it tells its own story about the environment. You've got deer, suggesting woodlands nearby. Wild boars, too.
And different kinds of equids, horses and...
Yes, Persian onager, horse, and probably donkey remains as well.
And the source mentions a specific bone, a rhinoceros talus bone, rhinos, and the Zagros Mountains.
It's a fantastic find. Shows the kind of megafauna that were roaming around back then. We also see wild sheep, goats, cattle, and then in later layers, domestic sheep, goats, and cattle.
Ah, okay. So the mix of animals, deer and boar from woods, equids from more open areas, it points to the environment around the cave being varied.
Exactly. Not just one type of landscape. It suggests a mosaic environment, patches of woodland, patches of grassland nearby.
That makes sense. That's how you support such biodiversity.
Precisely. The landscape could support this wide range of species over these long periods.
Then moving down the size scale, the collection wasn't just large animals. There were lots of smaller creatures, too.
There were. Hares are noted, probably prey for all those carnivores. Porcupines, hedgehogs, lots and lots of rodents, mice, rats, gerbils.
Okay.
Reptiles are actually very well represented, especially tortoises and monitor lizards. We also find bird bones and even, interestingly, evidence of aquatic resource.
Aquatic? In a mountain cave? Like fish?
Yes, the source material mentions fish remains and freshwater crabs.
Huh. How did they get there?
Well, along with terrestrial snails also found, it just emphasizes that whoever or whatever was using the cave animal or human was tapping into a really diverse local environment. There must have been streams or ponds nearby.
Okay, so we have this incredible collection, over 11,000 bones, this huge range of life. How did they all end up in the cave? The research said it was complex, right? Not just one single reason.
That's where taphonomy comes in the study of how bone assemblages form. And yes, Wezmeh seems to have had multiple things going on. Clearly, it was a good shelter.
Especially for the carnivores.
Exactly. They might have dragged prey back there or simply died in the cave.
Could it have acted as a natural trap, too? You mentioned that shaft earlier.
Potentially, yes. That rear shaft, being dark with a drop, could easily have trapped smaller animals that wandered or fell in and couldn't get out. So natural mortality is part of it, animals dying from accidents or just old age or sickness within the cave.
But there was also evidence linking some bones directly to people.
Yes, definitely. Specifically, on some of the herbivore bones, researchers found clear signs of burning.
Burning? Like from cooking?
That's the strong implication. It points to human presence and processing of animals inside the cave. And this seems particularly noticeable in the layers that also contain those domestic animal bones we mentioned.
Right. Which brings us neatly to the other huge story preserved in Wezmeh, the human one, stretching back alongside all these animals for tens of thousands of years.
And this is where the caves really becomes this amazing time capsule for human history in the region. The most famous find, going way back to the late Pleistocene, is that Neanderthal child's tooth.
And the research confirmed it wasn't just a maybe, right? The analysis, the shape, the internal structure, it was definitely Neanderthal.
Precisely. It's considered solid evidence for Neanderthals being in the Zagros during that period.
Incredible. And then, much later, in the Holocene layers.
We find the remains of early Neolithic people, identified as herder farmers.
And the presence of those domestic animal bones, the sheep, goats, cattle, in those same Holocene layers, ties directly to these early pastoral groups using the cave, presumably.
It paints a very clear picture. You can actually see the shift in human lifeways recorded right there in the cave sediments. From hunter-gatherers potentially represented by that Neanderthal tooth, to these later farming communities.
But the human story from Wezmeh, particularly from those Neolithic remains, it get even more interesting with the genetic findings, didn't it?
Yes, this is where it gets really significant for understanding broader patterns. Genetic analysis was done on those early Neolithic individuals from Wezmeh and another nearby site.
And what did it show?
It linked them most closely to modern Iranian Zoroastrians.
Wow, so a direct link from these ancient farmers to a modern group. What's the bigger picture implication of that?
Well, it's not just an interesting ancestry finding, though it is that too. It really impacts how we think about the spread of agriculture. The traditional idea was often that farming began in one core area in the Fertile Crescent and then spread out.
Right.
But this genetic evidence from Wezmeh, combined with the archaeological evidence of early domesticated animals and farming practices in the Zagros, it challenges that simpler narrative.
So the DNA from the people in this cave, plus the animal bones and tools found with them, it suggests a more complicated story, that maybe the Zagros region itself was another place where farming started independently.
Exactly. It provides crucial genetic backing for the idea that the transition to agriculture wasn't just one event spreading out, but likely involved multiple centers and local populations developing these practices, including distinct groups right there in the Zagros.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize all this. We have this unparalleled animal biodiversity, this record of how the bones accumulated shelter, traps, human activity, and this incredibly deep, layered human story. Neanderthals, early farmers, these major genetic insights. The importance of Wezmeh seems huge.
It really is. It gives us these vital long-term perspectives on both environmental change and cultural shifts. We can literally track how the animal populations changed across big climate shifts.
Like from the Ice Age into the warmer period that followed.
Precisely, from the late Pleistocene into the early Holocene. You see it reflected in which animals were present. And at the same time, in the same layers, you see the evidence for these fundamental shifts in human life.
Middle Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, represented by the Neanderthal find. Then, thousands of years later, these Neolithic and Chalcolithic farmers and herders using the same space.
The sheer scale of the collection, the quality of preservation, and the breadth of what's recorded biological and archaeological, it makes Wezmeh Cave an absolutely essential reference point.
For understanding the whole region.
Yes, for understanding the long-term ecological history and the complex story of human adaptation and cultural transformation over millennia in Western Asia. It's a key site.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the research really drives home that Wezmeh Cave is so much more than just, a hole in the ground. It's this extraordinary biological and archaeological time capsule.
Absolutely. It holds this incredibly detailed record spanning tens of thousands of years, preserving lions, hyenas, rhinos, right down to tiny weasels and fish. And layered right in there is direct evidence of ancient Neanderthals and the early farmers, who literally changed the course of human history. I think this dive gives you a really good sense of that incredible biodiversity and the deep human story, all drawn from this latest research.
It definitely does. And it really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? I mean, if just one cave, this single spot on a mountainside like Wezmeh, can hold such a detailed record, a record of huge environmental changes, the lives of countless species, and fundamentally shift how we understand huge transitions like the move from hunting to farming. Well, what other incredible stories, maybe just as important, are still hidden right beneath our feet, in places we might just walk past every single day without a second thought?